Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, or whenever you happen to be viewing this. Welcome to the 17th episode of the TechForge podcast. I am your host for this evening, Dynamo Ned. You can just call me Ned, or Nate, or, you're watching this, whatever you want to call me. And I'm joined this evening by my two wonderful co-hosts, Jason and Hunter.
Hey, what's going on?
What?
So, what have you all been up to since last we met?
I got sick on Saturday, which was fun.
Ooh.
Yeah. And then I got mostly over it by the next day. Well, Sunday I was sick too, of course. And then Monday I got over it because I had to go to work.
Hopefully it didn't involve too much lung butter.
Just coughing my lungs out a couple times.
Oh.
And
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Feel better though, right?
Yeah, I went to the emergency room Saturday night.
What?
Because it was getting a little bit worse and urgent care was closed.
Ah.
They closed at 7 and I decided to get my stubborn butt to see a doctor at like 7:30. Got out at 11:30 p.m.
Yeah,
Wow.
There's no such thing as a quick visit to the ER.
That's true. Well, when you go there, they've got all these standards and stuff. They've got to run like this full battery of whatever on you.
Mm-hmm.
And then at one point I was sitting there, so they told me that I would have some medicine, and I was like, is that it? Because they're not coming back. Did they forget about me? Because I'm just, laying here like, this is cool and all, but what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
And then they took a while because they had some paperwork and stuff to get me.
Yeah.
Not too bad. At least it's only like up the road. In this small town, it's up the road.
Mm.
So, not that far away.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, from my end, not much really. It's been pretty uneventful. I did build my cousin a 2600X with an RX 580 for about $1,000.
Nice.
Very nice.
Oh, it was such a fun build. Built it in the Mesh 5C. I love that case so much. That's hands down the best mini ITX case that I know of, at least below $100.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such a solid case.
Yeah, the Mesh 5C is one I've been looking at, although I've probably got enough cases as it is, but, I'm always looking for the new one that's even better.
So, I
go.
guess with the Meshify C, I guess it's not a problem to have the cutout in the back covered, because I guess if you need to change out the cooler, CPU cooler, you can take off the SSD cover where you don't have to take the motherboard out.
Yeah, there's a back mounting bracket that holds all of your 2.5-inch form factor drives.
Yeah.
It's extremely convenient.
Yeah. I like how cases have those now. They look so nice.
Yeah, it definitely cleans up the internals of the case.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, if you're going with a 2.5-inch form factor drive setup for all of your storage, you can remove the 3.5-inch drive bay that's located in the basement.
Yeah.
Right?
And that allows you to mount like a 360 AIO in the front or radiator, or an additional 120 or 140 fan. So lots of options for airflow. It's very awesome.
Yep. So, if you've been following any of the tech news this week, then you probably have a pretty good idea of what we're going to be talking about tonight. Of course, Intel launched their 9th gen Core series with their new Core i9-9900K as the flagship of that mainstream line. They also launched or they also announced their Basin Falls refresh, which is basically Skylake X Plus. And they also announced the Xeon W3175X, which is that crazy 28-core chip that they showed off at Computex with that overclocked but not overclocked with a water chiller CPU at Computex.
That thing is absolutely crazy.
Yep.
It is indeed, and we will talk about that in just a minute. But there's a couple of smaller things. Yeah, it's a week full of big tech news when a Google event is the small news. But Intel was not the only one to release new hardware this week. Also, Google showed off some new devices at their event for the Google Pixel 3 and Pixel 3 XL. So I'll have a link in the description down below to all the articles we're going to be discussing in tonight's episode. And this includes one here from Wired, which discusses the devices that Google debuted at their Pixel event. Of course, the highlight was on the Pixel 3 and the Pixel 3 XL. Oddly absent from that presentation was what exact hardware is going to be powering the Pixel 3 and the Pixel 3 XL. There was a lot of discussion about the screens and the fact that they're going to be OLED, which, having had an OLED screen in my first generation Moto X, they are excellent.
Nice.
The screens this year are going to be a little bit bigger than they were for the previous generations. They're going to be 5.3 and 6.3 inches, respectively. In addition, you're getting a better processor. At least Google is claiming a better processor for the camera, as well as a 12 megapixel, or excuse me, 2 wide-angle 12 megapixel camera lenses designed for wide-angle selfies on the front as well as the back.
Nice.
So they're also including a new security chip that sounds vaguely reminiscent of what Apple did with the latest generation of iPhones. Only Google is calling their security chip the Titan M, and is apparently the same chip that Google uses for its own data centers. And so they're claiming it should provide enterprise-level encryption for your smartphone.
Nice.
Of course, how much that actually evaluates to security-wise in the real world, given Google's recent problems with security, who knows? But if you are interested in getting yourself a Pixel 3, the Pixel 3 will start at $799 for the base model, with the Pixel 3 XL starting at $899. Now, me personally, yes, Pixel devices are nice, but at that price range, I can build myself a solid gaming PC and have change left over.
Absolutely. I just think these smartphones are just getting way overpriced.
Yeah, they are. That's why the Samsung 8 is my last phone for a long time.
And maybe it's just me, but I prefer the versatility of a PC. Yes, there's a lot of things I can get done on my smartphone, but there's a lot of those things that I can get done faster on my PC.
But you also don't have the portability of put your PC in your pocket and take it with you like you have a phone.
Well, obviously, Mr. Hunter, you don't have a Raspberry Pi that you get around with you everywhere.
I do. I just don't know what to... I haven't gotten around to doing anything with it. I'm a terrible pie person.
How can you not like pie?
especially the
Everybody
raspberry
likes-
variety.
Everybody likes pep.
Yeah.
I really want to get my hands on a Pi Zero, to be honest. This is getting off topic, but I want to get my hands on a Pi Zero because I managed to get a while back one of those old Motorola Atrix docks that was originally designed for the Motorola Atrix. And with a couple of extension cables, you can hook those up to a Raspberry Pi W or Raspberry Pi Zero W and basically turn that dock into a full-blown laptop.
Yeah.
For not that much money. And I want to experiment and see how that works. I did an experiment with the dock and connected it to my current Raspberry Pi 3. And it works great, all except in one respect. And that is you had to have a special cable to connect the USB connection because you can connect it to power that will power the Raspberry Pi from the battery pack in the dock. But if you do, there's no data transfer from the keyboard to the Raspberry Pi. So you actually had to have a splitter cable so it splits the data and the power plugs. And so that's the one part I've not worked out yet. I'm either going to have to make one or find one.
Interesting.
But once I do that, I'm going to proceed with that project. Anyway, digressing.
I want to see it when you're done. Or even when you get
Sure.
the stuff, like, sounds like a really fun project.
Well, I found the dock off eBay, and they were selling really cheap because the phone isn't made anymore. No one makes the Motorola Atrix 4G or the Droid Bionic, which I think were the two phones this dock was made for.
Oh my gosh. What is that? First or second gen Android? The Droid Bionic?
More like, I think either late Gingerbread, which was like Android 2.3, or early Ice Cream Sandwich around 4.0.
Ice cream sandwich.
So you're probably talking like 2012-ish.
Wow.
Isn't it funny how we think about that as being like forever ago in phone generations?
Well, being the fact that we like tech, I would like to think that there's a relationship with our own internal clock versus the tech industry. So it does feel like forever ago. In tech time, it really is. It's like the Jurassic.
Right. I mean, think about 6 years ago in 2012. The current Intel processor at the time was the Core i7-3770K Ivy Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's considered just barely on the edge of viable for day-to-day use.
Yeah.
At least from a gaming standpoint.
I don't know. I think it still makes a decent gamer. I kind of agree, but I don't know.
I mean,
it's borderline, I guess.
I mean, I still use a Core i7-2600K in my backup rig. So,
yeah. As long as you've got 8 threads somewhere, you know what I mean?
Let's see.
Yep.
Speaking of portable computing, though, another one of the devices that Google debuted in their Pixel event was the Pixel Slate. Now, last year they debuted a new version of the Pixel Book, which was supposed to be their notebook version, and it didn't take off very well, at least in that variant. And so the new Pixel Slate is basically a hybrid between a tablet, a phone, and a laptop. And probably one of the first ones I've seen that actually looks solid. It's a tablet with a 12.3-inch display. And it essentially, well, it doesn't come with, but you can get a cover for it. It reminds me of basically Google's version of the Microsoft Surface Pro.
Mm-hmm.
Except, of course, it's running Chrome OS/Android. And the idea is that it's designed to be basically everything. It can do the same job as a tablet, same jobs as a laptop, has access to all the Google software. So if you work for a company that uses G Suite, then this should be able to handle most of your day-to-day tasks. And the good news about it is the price. Instead of being almost $1,000 like the Pixel Book last year, the Pixel Slate starts at $599, which is much more in line with, say, the iPad Pro, which I believe is the target market. Of
Basically,
course,
the up-tiered iPad, I guess.
yes. And of course, like always, we live in the dongle era. So, of course, they're going to sell you all the accessories. The keyboard is separate and costs you $199.
Oh my
The
god.
pen is separate and costs you $99.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, if you want to connect things through anything but USB-C, they've got a dongle for that.
So you put it all together, and guess what it amounts to? The same price as the ebook.
Pretty much.
I'd almost rather have a yoga.
Yeah, the yoga books.
Yep.
Let's
I've seen
see.
a few of those back when the 2016 era yoga. So I want to say, was it Skylake? Yeah, I think they were Skylake.
Sounds about right. Let's see. What else did Google come out with? Oh, yes. They debuted their new Google Home Hub. So basically, Amazon has their Echo Show. Facebook has their new Portal. And so Google is debuting their brand new Home Hub, which is essentially a Google Home with a 7-inch screen attached. Oddly enough, unlike the Echo Show and the Facebook Portal, the Home Hub does not have a built-in camera.
So spying free.
Well,
But you can't do video calling.
right.
It's probably got a built-in holographic camera with X-ray technology.
It's actually just a pinhole infrared camera.
Oh, you mean like the Xbox Connect that watched
Yeah.
you while you're playing and while you weren't playing?
Because it wanted to be able to detect when you actually wanted it to detect you.
Yeah.
And so it just assumed it always wanted to be detected.
Mm-hmm.
Creepiest device ever.
Let's see. They also rolled out Google Duplex, which is apparently an AI tool that they're going to be parsing out slowly.
That's... Go ahead.
Basically, it's going to be their AI tool that can answer calls for you and handle simple day-to-day tasks.
Yep. Answer calls for you like you have your own secretary or your own assistant.
Right.
Well, Google Assistant being smarter. So if you're either not wanting to answer calls because you're, well, I wouldn't say lazy, more like you don't want to answer telemarketer calls, that would be great for. But the videos I've seen is it can make an appointment for you. Like if you don't want to make a hair appointment, it can act like it's calling for on behalf of you and say, I need to make an appointment for, and then whatever I guess your name is, and then it's mimicking an actual person and having like ums and ahs and that's not good. How about this date at this time? Okay, we can do that. That kind of thing. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, the fact that it's able to be passably human, can Google Duplex pass the Turing test?
Yeah.
And if so, what does that mean?
Well,
Skynet.
Basically, if it passes the Turing test, it's, what do they call that? A bona fide AI?
Yeah. As
In
long as
theory.
it doesn't think that it can rule your life and then start doing stuff you don't tell it to. Like all the sci-fi movies. AI and then killing humans. That one android that said the facial recognition facial robot that the female robot that was making facial expressions, that it actually said, I don't like humans, I want to kill all humans. I'm just joking. It's just a joke.
Right.
I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where AI really goes, honestly.
Yeah. Eventually, I think companies are moving towards possibly Android helpers. I've seen a lot of videos and a lot of stuff about companies making Androids, and they're working on integrating AI with it, which is really cool and scary because we have a lot of sci-fi shows and movies and books that say this is not a good thing.
Oh yeah, all you have to do is watch one of those videos from Boston Dynamics, and it'll be no wonder why the AIs decide to revolt against us.
Yeah. Well, the collision detection is a necessary element to its learning, but yeah, stop hitting me! I'm gonna kill you.
Well, let's hope that they handle AI better than they handle security, at least over at Google. As Google is shutting down their Google Plus social media service, which honestly, who is still using it at this point?
It's integrated into your Google account, I think. But
it is, but
actively using it, I don't think anybody. Maybe a few people.
I will admit there were a couple of Linux groups over there that I'd pop in on and check every month or so.
Yeah.
But I mean, after this, it's no wonder they're shutting down Google Plus, because apparently they tried to cover up the fact that there was a security bug that allowed third-party developers to access Google Plus user profiles since 2015.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah.
And apparently Google discovered it and patched it out in March, but didn't tell anybody.
Well, they didn't want to ride on the issue that Facebook was facing.
Right. They didn't want to have their Cambridge Analytica moment. But apparently this was a very similar bug in that when you gave permission to an app to access your public Google Plus profile data, it would let the developers pull yours and your friends' non-public profile fields. In other words, you were consenting to having your public information shared, but in reality, it wound up sharing everything.
That's really scary. Because thinking about what people use Facebook for the kids and stuff, And if you lock down, even if you lock down your security settings, it's just like what people put on. Or even, I don't know if Google Plus pulled stuff automatically from your Google experience to Google profile. It's just stuff you work. I mean, if you have work documents or anything like that, you don't want everybody to see that stuff.
Right.
Like Google Docs. If Google Docs got hacked, then your work documents, if you had it there, and other stuff could be vulnerable to people seeing them. I would hate that to happen. I thought Google had pretty good security.
Well, apparently, this was a bug in the way that information was shared and the way account permissions were handled.
Yeah.
And so Google has decided that in light of this report and in light of their own internal Project Strobe security audit, that they're going to be winding down Google Plus as a consumer product over the next 10 months, but are going to attempt to continue Google Plus as potentially an enterprise product.
Okay.
And one of the things they discovered in their analysis of Google Plus during this audit was that 90% of Google Plus sessions were less than 5 seconds, which means most Google Plus sessions were people clicking on it by mistake, opening it up, realizing it wasn't what they went to go to, and then closing it.
This is not Facebook. Close.
Well, it was a great idea. It was just poorly implemented, and it really lacked features.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's going up against a giant like Facebook, it either has to have some sort of a niche gimmick. I hate to say gimmick. Unique feature set, or most of the features that most users like to use from Facebook.
I mean, they tried to with the Google Circles, so you can have your circle for your work friends, your circle for your church friends, your circle for school friends, and they don't have to all interact with each other. And then the groups, which was cool. I like the group pages. Like if you're into photography, you can go to those pages and all that stuff. Facebook has the audience. Facebook just has the, I guess, easier usability. But people back when it started, people were like, I don't want to go to Google Plus when I'm already on Facebook. I don't want to have to either use two platforms or when I have invested so much in this one already.
Right. And that's really going to be the big thing moving forward, is any challenger to Facebook has to fight against Facebook's vendor lock-in.
Yeah. That's like when when EA wanted to create their own, when they wanted to create Origin and take all their games off Steam. It's like, but I don't want to have to go to another platform to play games. I want everything in one place. But, I mean, people had to deal with that. It's just Google Plus and catch on as well as Google wanted it to.
Well, what this screams to me, with them moving to the enterprise, they're looking for a revenue stream for it. And if it catches on, I imagine after a little bit of time, they'll probably revise it somewhat, maybe give it a new wrap, and throw it back out there in the pool for consumers.
And apparently they use a modified version of Google Plus internally for all their internal instant messaging and their intrasocial stuff. And so I mean, if anyone could figure out how to spin off Google Plus into an enterprise product, a la Slack or
Yeah.
or something along those lines, I think Google could do it.
Yeah. One added thing to talk about with the Google updates and stuff, one thing I saw today is they have a new feature for Street View. If you're trying to find a location, a building or something, instead of looking at the dot on the map, you're like, okay, where do I go? Where's the cone pointing to? They'll have it where they're integrating in the camera, the phone's camera, where it'll show you exactly where you're going and having arrows and stuff. That's awesome. That is amazing.
Sounds like the first steps toward true augmented reality.
Yeah, and they're having a AI little sprite is a fox in the view, kind of like Pokemon Go characters are on the screen. They'll have that, and if you want to turn that, I guess if you want to turn that on and have it guide you to where exactly you're going, other than that, they'll have like arrows. So you'll see like a building on your camera, and they'll say, instead of just like where your cone is, it'll be the arrows of go right, left, whatever. And also it'll like pop up in the augmented space. It'll pop up if you see a uniform building that has 10 offices, you don't know what exactly you're looking at because there's no signs around. It'll have augmented reality signs, little virtual hang down things of this is this location and this address goes to this location. It's like, oh, well, that makes more sense in a city place. Like that'd be great for people going to conventions and they've never been to this city. They don't know where they're going. I spent like an hour and a half trying to find my car because I couldn't remember where it parked. And I don't know where I'm going. I haven't been to this city enough. So that'll be amazing once they roll that out.
Right. Cool stuff. All right, let's see what else. Oh, yes. While we're still talking about phones, Razer has released their second edition of the Razer phone, and AnandTech was able to get their hands on. Apparently, the new Razer phone is going to include a upgraded version of their original 5.72-inch IGZO LCD display at 2560 by 1440 resolution with variable refresh of 40 to 120 hertz. And apparently it is now rated for 645 nits of peak brightness, up 50% over the last generation.
What's a nit?
So nits is the measure of brightness for a display.
Interesting. It seems more like a gamer-focused phone, though, I think, right?
Right. So the Razer phone is designed more with gamers in mind. Some additional features they're including. They're upgrading it to include wireless charging via key chargers.
Definitely needs that.
They are improving the front camera to 8 megapixels, making it capable of recording at 1080p, 60 frames a second. They are upgrading the front and back of the device to Gorilla Glass 5, which is 2 generations improved. The previous model used the Gorilla Glass 3. I cannot say that correctly.
Gorilla Glass.
And, of course, it has it's been upgraded to IP67 water resistance.
And you can't forget the RGB logo.
Of course. It's not a gamer product without RGB, right?
Yep. The rear camera got in a bump up from 12 megapixel to 20 megapixel on the wide angle. One of the cameras, and I think it's the back camera, and then the front camera is an 8 megapixel. So I got a downgrade from last time of 12, if I'm reading this right.
No, the front camera, it's still an 8 megapixel on the front, but the change is that on the rear cameras, for the wide angle lens, they went with a 20 megapixel, but for the close in, they went with 8 megapixel, so that there would be greater, there'd be greater definition up close.
Okay.
Apparently.
For macro shots? Or...
Right.
Okay.
The front camera is largely the same, with the exception of, I believe it has, no, it's the same f-stop.
Yeah, 1.75. Doesn't say it's... So it's not an autofocus? Or is it...
I don't think they say here in this story, but I couldn't imagine they would make it not.
Depends on if the Sony IM-X363 OIS has autofocus.
I guess we'll find out. But otherwise, it's looking like a solid upgrade over the previous generation, but they are also upgrading the price from $699 to $799.
Yep.
So,
well, I mean, they've got a few new changes to it, which is good. The IP rating is... It actually has an IP rating now.
And it does support HDR10 content. So...
Yeah. And the wireless charging is definitely a really good thing. Same battery size, but wireless charging is a very handy thing.
Yeah,
Back when my phone could actually do it without having a case on it, I'd have to move the... I think I'd probably have to move the sticker to the case for me to do it charging or something like that. But yeah, wireless charging is nice.
So, if you're looking for a high-end smartphone, you have more options than ever. And if you want something gamer-specific, you've got the new Razer Phone 2 as an option.
Or wait for the ROG.
Yes, the ROG. That thing...
It's like a desktop in one.
Yeah, that thing is absolute insanity. When you have to include an optional vapor chamber accessory to cool your phone, it's just slightly ridiculous.
And then the added price of the controller module, and then the monitor dock, so you can use keyboard and mouse on your phone hooked up to a monitor.
Right.
At that point, why not have a desktop all in one? I mean, why not have a desktop and a which is more powerful depending on which hardware you put into it? Probably more powerful when you're still hooking it up to a keyboard, mouse, and monitor.
Some people just want that portable convenience. I remember a few years ago how big, well, I don't know big, but there was definitely a niche community around the Kangaroo PC.
What was that?
So the Kangaroo PC was basically, you remember when there was all that push for the, what I call the dongle PCs, like the...
Are those the
little...
Intel
the Intel Compute Stick.
Yes.
So the Kangaroo PC was a similar concept, But the thing was, the Kangaroo PC was a dock, and then the actual processor, RAM, and all that stuff was in a replaceable module that you could. So depending on which module you get would change the performance, but it was still a Windows 10 PC. You know, you could get the version with the Atom processor and like 4 gigs of RAM for, I want to say it was like $99 or so.
Kangaroo PC?
Yeah, the Kangaroo PC.
I've never heard of this.
Oh yeah, I do remember that. Seeing that on Indiegogo or Kickstarter or something.
And so there's been that concept for a while of having a hyper portable PC that is still a full PC and can be used as such, but also can be used on the go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was some other one like that on one of the Kickstarter type websites. I was about to get it, but the one that I wanted was like 500, I think, because it had the 64 gig or MCC memory.
Right.
But the better one that you wanted that came with Windows 10, especially one that came with Windows 10, was a lot more expensive. And I'm like, no, I don't have that money.
Right.
So small.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the appeal of the Kangaroo PC. It was literally small enough that it could fit under the TV.
And you can mount it if you have like mounting hardware. You can mount it on the back of a monitor.
Oh, as long as it had VESA mounts or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah. Like my Nook is small. It's not that small, but it's small, and it can mount on the back of a TV or a monitor.
These are actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, those Nook style computers, they have there's a fairly broad appeal for them. I mean, you're generally getting laptop grade processors, but
yeah,
if a laptop grade processor is good enough for 95% of what people do on a PC, then why not have something in a smaller form factor that you can take with you everywhere? And
yeah, like traveling, and you can put since it has like a USB port, you can have your, I don't know, viewing content. You can make it like a streaming PC with a little thumb drive with whatever content, like movies or something you saved on there, backed up your collection of DVDs, and then take it to a hotel when you're on a trip or something, and instead of watching the dumb shows or movies on the hotel stuff or paying for it, you have everything in your hand.
Yeah, the Kangaroo Plus, I'd be a little hesitant to put Windows on, though. 2 gigs of RAM, 32 gig internal.
Yeah, that one wasn't that great, but there's some other ones that had there was one that had a 4 gig RAM and one that had and then the big brother version that had 8 gigs somehow.
yeah,
8 gigs I think would be good. Good.
Yeah, those compute stick style PCs.
Sirius. That's it. The Sirius B mini PC.
Oh, yes, I remember that one.
Oh, yeah. And the Sirius A. That's what I was thinking of. Because that one was really nice. And I think there was another one similar to it with another name that was really good too. The specs were really good.
Well, before we get too far afield, we probably do need to get back to the topics.
Yeah.
In particular, the big topic this week, which is Intel strikes back against Ryzen with their new 9th generation Coffee Lake refresh.
Dun dun dun.
In particular, led by their flagship for the mainstream market anyway, Core i9-9900K. The first 8-core 16-thread chip that Intel has offered on their mainstream socket.
Mm-hmm.
As well as refreshed motherboards with the Z390 chipset. Of course, that wasn't the only thing they announced on Monday. They also announced their new Basin Falls refresh, led by their Core i9-9980XE CPU with 18 cores and 36 threads.
Oh, for HEDT.
Right.
Gotcha.
For the X299 platform.
Mm-hmm.
And if that sounds awfully familiar, it's because it's basically a refreshed version of the 7980 XE.
Mm-hmm.
The key difference being, well, the new soldered thermal interface material. That's right, you won't have to delid your processors anymore to actually get them to clock where they're supposed to. And finally, they announced a new CPU that is a rather different beast from the others. And that's the Xeon W3175X. This is the 28-core, 56-thread CPU that was extremely heavily overclocked and water-chilled at Computex, but now revealed and commercially available. And, well, when we take a look at the specs, we'll see, no, it doesn't quite hit 5 gigahertz on air.
So I wonder if they're basically just leaving. I wonder if they've kind of just given up competing with Threadripper.
Well, the 3175X could arguably be said to be competing with Threadripper, but I mean, it does have fewer cores and threads, but it does have Intel's famous clock advantage.
Yeah, but it boosts up to 4.3, doesn't it?
Correct. The base clock on the W3175X, let me scroll down there to that part in this article. Its base clock is 3.1 gigahertz, but its all-core boost clock is 3.8, and its single-core turbo is 4.3 gigahertz.
That sounds right in the wheelhouse of the 32-core Threadripper 2. It boosts up to 4 gigahertz, I want to say, or 4.2, somewhere in there.
The big advantage for the W3175X is that it's going to be the first Xeon since the first generation Core series. So that would be like the Xeon X 5650 era.
Wow.
To be unlocked.
That's interesting.
So it will handle up to 68 PCIe Express lanes, support 6 channels of DDR4 2066 memory, or 2666 memory, as well as ECC RAM. So
it's not compatible with the current platform, though. If it's using 6-channel memory.
It is not. It is on a new LGA 3647 socket. Well, I say new. The reality is the 3647 socket has been used by Intel in their enterprise markets for a while now for their very high-end desktop or very high-end server market. It's just now these chips are filtering from the server market into Intel is kind of, I think, based on what I'm reading on it and based on what I'm seeing here, I think Intel is hedging their bets a little bit with this Xeon. By calling it a Xeon and calling it an unlocked Xeon, I think what they're saying is this is still an enterprise chip, but if you're an enthusiast with the money, or if you're someone who really needs this kind of processing power, it is available for slightly less than you'd have to pay at enterprise prices.
It's still very expensive.
Yeah. Officially, no price has been announced.
Uh,
But most people are thinking that the 3175X will be somewhere on the order of around 5K.
Good luck, Intel fans.
Now, to be fair, the chip it's based on, which is the Intel Xeon 8180, is a $10,000 part.
Oh, my belly hurts.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. 32 core Threadripper 2 has almost the exact same number of PCIe slot or whatever lanes. And you get 32 cores for around the same clock speed range at $1,800, Ned.
Right, but they can't price it at $1,800 because that would put it in the direct line of fire of their own 9980XE, which currently retails for $1,979. I mean, Intel kind of has themselves in a corner here. They can't price it as low as their 18 core.
I agree.
Yep.
I understand.
I'm really wondering who buys these CPUs. I mean, I can't imagine a business having that much. Possibly, I mean, I don't know how much money businesses have for. Huge businesses have for refresh of hardware, but still, for buying a computer that has a 28 core at $5,000 for one part.
Again, the $5,000 figure is simply ones I've seen punted around as an idea based on previous pricing schemes by some of the tech press. So,
even if it was $3,000, one part.
But again, remember who the market is. The market for a Xeon like this is typically going to be medium businesses, probably like design houses, people who do high-end video production work,
right?
People who are doing 3D animation and modeling, engineers, scientists, people who have that kind of money to throw around. And so there was a comment made by Gamers Nexus Steve interviewed some of the other tech press that were there at the Intel launch event.
Saw that earlier.
And one of the statements made was that we're starting to see a new market segmentation from Intel with this generation. And I hadn't thought about it this way, but it makes sense. We have the mainstream with the core i3, i5, i7, and the new i9, the 9900K.
Mm-hmm.
We have the what they call the prosumer market, or the producer-consumer market, which are enthusiasts who do content creation, maybe as a side business, but also like to game with like the Socket 2066 stuff, the X299, what was traditionally their high-end desktop. But now we're seeing a new high-end desktop that's your ultra enthusiast, that is really an enterprise workstation line that is also accessible to the enthusiast.
There's also the people who want the latest and greatest and like top tier greatest. Those are the people who previously had the quad SLI set up because they have the money.
Right. I mean, you're
Not
always going to
because
have.
they needed quad.
You're
They
always going to
needed
have
for. Sorry.
you're always going to have the whales.
Yeah.
To use the game development term, you're always going to have the whales who are willing to spend tons and tons of money on your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And typically
show it
they're a
off.
very tiny percentage of the market. But you make a lot of money off them.
Yeah. Those would be like the Uber content creators that probably do more than YouTube videos. I mean, I can see it for like, I'm making a CGI movie, and I need 4 video cards. That makes sense. Well, now you can't do that, but previously, like with the 980 Ti's, now you'd have to have 2 2080 Ti's.
Right. And for a super high-end workstation, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
I find the W3175X to be a fascinating product in theory,
Mm-hmm.
but I think a lot of it's going to depend how does Intel price it and how does Intel position it in the market. Because if I'm already spending almost $2,000 for a 9980 XE, how much more performance am I getting and how much more money am I going to have to spend to get it for the 3175X?
Good question.
That's going to be the question.
Yep.
That's a good question because there are some content creation workloads now recently where they're leveraging the onboard IGP of the mainstream processors more, and there are some workloads that actually outperform the really high threaded CPUs. So, for example, if you had an i7 8700K and you're on Adobe Premiere and you're producing essentially one video at a time, there are some workloads or workflows in that use case where your i7 8700K is actually producing and encoding the content faster than a $2,000 7980XE.
Right, because of the built-in QuickSync codec.
Exactly.
And yes, technically, QuickSync does not produce quite as high quality a product as pure software rendering, but it produces something very close, and it's much, much faster.
Mm-hmm. And there's some other graphically intensive effects that the onboard IGP can also be leveraged to encode or produce that are also faster. Now, where the higher threaded CPUs definitely benefit is if you're doing more than one. Those are the types of use cases where you see the benefit there. But if you're just working on one at a time, there's some workloads that integrated IGP will help out tremendously.
Let's see. I think we've hit most of the high points. Yeah, the Core X lineup basically is a refresh of the previous generation 7000 series. But there is one slight tweak or change. and that's in the 7820X and the 9820X and the 9900X. Now, personally, I'm kind of surprised they went with 9900X in the naming scheme. I could totally see someone looking at a 9900X and a 9900K and thinking they're the same thing.
Yeah.
But apparently, the 9900X and the 9820X are both going to be 10-core, 20-thread parts. The only real difference between them is that the 9820X is only going to have 16.5 megabytes of L3 cache, and is going to have a slightly lower 3.3 gigahertz base clock.
That's interesting.
But it's going to be $100 less. So,
that sounds to me like it's probably a product stack filler.
Yeah.
Like they have... So sometimes you'll get cases where you've got... Say you have 10 SKUs in a product stack, and then you release an update, but you only have 9 real variations. Sometimes if you have to fill 10 and your customers expect 10, then you'll take one of them probably in the middle of that product stack somewhere and like add some additional features to it. That kind of sounds like that to me.
Because otherwise, they're fairly well segmented. The 9800X has 8 cores, 16 threads. The 9820X has 10 cores, 20 threads. The 9920X has 12 cores, 24 threads. And 9940 has 1428. 9960 has 1632. And the 9980 has 1836.
Nice.
It's only with the 9900X that you run into it having the same core and thread count as the 9820.
You know, I know these are just refreshes from Coffee Lake or previous generation parts, but I'm kind of looking forward to the i7 8-core 8-thread part. So coming back to the mainstream, I'm looking forward to seeing what the 8-core 8-thread part can do. I think that's an interesting part, and obviously the big dog, the 8-core 16-thread. I'm really kind of looking forward to seeing what these parts are capable of, especially with using soldered tims.
Right, and you know there is a bit of hurt over the fact that the i7 no longer has hyper-threading. You know, that was the thing that differentiated it for so long.
Right.
Yep.
Was i7 means hyper-threading, and now it doesn't.
Well, they had to find some way to differentiate.
Right, and I don't disagree.
Yeah, Joker in the 7 reviewer Intel launch video that Gamers Nexus did, Joker came up with said a good comment. If they kept the i7 being 6-core 12-thread and then the i9 being 8-core 16-thread, that would make more sense.
Yeah.
Because it would leave room if you need the 2 more cores and 4 more threads, then you go up to the i9. If you don't, and you need hyper-threading, stick with the i7. That makes more sense to me and to him and probably to anybody.
Right, but it doesn't push sales of your new i9.
True. That's true.
Because now, with the current scheme, if you need more than 8 threads, then you have to purchase the 9900K.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest, the price they gave at the launch event for the 9900K is not the retail price. It's actually the price per 1,000. So if you bought 1,000 of these CPUs, this would be the individual price each. Was $488 US.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you take into account typical retail markup, you're probably looking at around a $520, $530 part for Intel's 8-core, 16-thread CPU.
Which both figures really aren't too far from where it's currently at on pre-order. So on Amazon, the pre-order price is about $500.
Right.
So it's in the ballpark.
And so I guess the question is, leaving aside the benchmark issue, which we'll address in a moment.
Yeah.
Do we really think the 9900K is going to provide $200 worth of extra value over the 2700X?
No. No. Nope. Nope. It won't. Because if you look at everything, and we'll get to the Z390 boards here in a second, but so if you're buying an i9 9900K, you're most likely buying it to overclock, right? But to do that,
Right.
you need a motherboard with a few things. You need a good VRM. You need good memory power delivery. You need good build quality for your motherboard. You need a pretty decent and solid BIOS. It's all right if it's clunky, but it has to be functional. To do that, you're spending $200 on the board. You're spending $500, or okay, we'll just say $500 on the processor. That's $700 for 2700X. $300 for a decent, let's just say X470 board. Even though there's some really good B450s, but if you're looking at an X470, you're looking at around $150 for a decent, a decent X470 board with a solid VRM. Now, overclocking is not really recommended because you're not going to get much more out of it than what XFR2 and Precision Boost will give you. But that's still cheaper than the processor. $450, you get a solid chip and a motherboard that's extremely good.
And don't forget, you also get with the 2700X the Wraith Prism cooler.
Correct.
Which the Intel CPU does not come with a cooler.
Yep.
So that's something you have to buy extra.
So custom water cooling loop, probably around $700. Decent heatsink. Now, if you're overclocking, you want to figure at least 200 watts of cooling. So that's a Noctua NH15 or 14. So that's right around $90 or $100 right there. You're thinking at least a 240 AIO. If it were me, I'd probably go with a 360, which that's 120 at least. So,
and even if you cheap out and get something like a Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 4, you're still looking at a minimum $50 heatsink.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd really. That's a good heatsink, but I don't know if I'd trust it for a 9900K overclock.
That's why I said, even if you cheap out on the heatsink, you're still looking around $50 or so. I mean, even if you go super budget on the heatsink and you buy, the equivalent of a 212 Evo, which you're not going to overclock a whole lot with that. But that's still $30 you have to spend that you don't with the Ryzen chip.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the Wraith Prism cooler, especially in a decent case, will allow XFR2 to stretch its legs a bit. It will. I've tested it many times. And that's a solid, especially for getting it for free. Come on. It's a very solid cooler. Just no. I mean, in terms of overall value, it's been proven that the 2700X is within 5 to 10% on average in gaming versus an 8700K, even an overclocked 8700K. Within 5 to 10%. The only reason it wouldn't be is if the game is just really poorly optimized. Even then, if you sat down at both of them, you're not going to notice the difference. And the 2700X is the better overall processor anyway, with the extra threads. But now, when you take dollar versus performance into consideration, 9900K is going to be a really good part, but for the money, absolutely not. 2700X all the way. $450. Motherboard and processor. Add 16 gigs of RAM. Just throw $200 on top of that. That's $650.
Right,
Still.
and $200 now for 16 gigs of RAM. That's the pricey RAM.
Yes, you can actually get decent sticks that would work well with Ryzen and we're talking, 3200 megahertz, 3000 megahertz RAM for about $150.
Yeah.
So.
Hunter was mentioning earlier, and I saw the ad from Newegg. There was a nice DDR4 3000 kit on sale. It was a Corsair Vengeance LPX kit, DDR4 3000, on sale for $139.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, value still goes to Ryzen. Bottom line.
Yeah.
But one place where the Intel does have the advantage is in clock speed. And this comes from Tom's Hardware. Apparently, famed LN2 overclocker Splave was able to take a Core i9 9900K to 6.9 gigahertz with a 1.7 volt V-core on LN2 cooling.
That's pretty insane. Weren't they able to take Ryzen to 7, though?
It was close.
It was close. I still think technically the 9900K beats it, though, because they were able to... The 6.9 gigahertz was stable on all cores.
Okay. Yeah, with the Ryzen overclock, it was like 1 or 2, right?
However, on a single core, they were able to push the same system up to 7.4 gigahertz.
Jeez. That's insane. You imagine the smoke coming off of that pot?
Shit.
All that steam.
Splave also told Tom's Hardware that on some samples he was able to get up to 7.1 gigahertz all core, but that it was not entirely stable. The results wouldn't validate. Like, the test would complete, but the results would not validate. So,
well, with Solder Tim, I imagine we'll see people overclocking to 5.1 all core, probably on average, and then golden samples be 5.3 to 5.4.
Given how well the 8700K performed, that wouldn't surprise me.
And this is supposed to be the next iteration, so I imagine they've optimized the manufacturing process a bit. Plus, you add in the solder tin. So, because a lot of people have trouble getting to 5 gigahertz unless they've delidded their 8700K.
Right.
Yep.
And that's even with aggressive cooling. That it's just that standard heatsink material, or that standard TIM that they've used forever and a day. Just it's not a good thermal conductor. It's more of an insulator.
All right. Well, we had to come around to it eventually. So we've talked about the hardware, the new Core i9 9900K, the the new Core X series for the X299 refresh, and even the outlandish W3175X Xeon. But that's not really been what the focus has been on this week in the tech press. Instead, it's been a focus on a set of benchmarks that were apparently commissioned by Intel to a company called Principled Technologies, wherein they showed some figures for how the Core i9-9900K compared against some of its major competitors, including some of Intel's own processors, such as the 8700K and the 8086K, as well as the Intel Core i9-9980XE, the Core i9-9900X, and the AMD Ryzen 7 2700X, and the AMD Ryzen Threadripper 2990WX and 2950X. They tested all these processors in 19 games and obtained results that a number of people in the tech press found fishy, or at the very least, kind of off. Now, one thing I will give Principled Technologies credit for, and that is that they were extremely transparent in their original study about how they benchmarked the systems. They were very thorough in all the information they included. But there were a couple of curious things that showed up in their testing methodology. Namely, that the Ryzen systems they tested did not have the same coolers that were used on the Intel systems or on the Threadripper systems. In particular, they made the point that the Ryzen systems were run using the box cooler, which immediately comes out as slightly odd, because if you're using the same cooler across all the other systems, why would you use a different one for that system? So that came across as a little odd, but maybe it was just maybe that was just a mistake on their part.
Mm-hmm.
But as some of the tech press began to examine their testing methodology, Steve from Hardware Unboxed in particular, who also writes for TechSpot, which is an Australian tech outlet, looked at these benchmarks and found a series of inconsistencies with his own benchmark data. And while in particular, a lot of Steve from Hardware Unboxed, a lot of his frustration was with the fact that he was not allowed to refute these benchmarks with his own data because he is under an NDA that he can't publish independent benchmarks until October 19th, which is 10 days after when these were released. And so what he was able to do is show how his testing with the 2700X and the 8700K, which of course are not under embargo, compared with the results that were in Principled Technologies' original study. And he showed in several places that his data does not match up with the, as he called them, paid results at all.
Well, his 8700K data was close, within a margin of error, but yeah, you're right on the Ryzen stuff. Absolutely. Go ahead. I didn't mean to.
Yeah, the 2700X in particular showed entirely different benchmark numbers.
Yes.
And so he continued reading through Principled Technologies' report, and he found another rather odd piece of information. That the Ryzen 7 2700X was tested with game mode in Ryzen Master turned on.
Yep. You know what that does?
it essentially takes your 8-core, 16-thread processor and turns it into a quad-core.
4-core, yeah.
By completely disabling one of the CCXs on your Ryzen 7 2700X. So, whether they intended to or not, and I'm going to give Principal Technologies the benefit of the doubt here, although I have my own suspicions. Essentially, what Principal Technologies did, assuming they made the mistake here, because they said they did test the 2990WX and the 2950X in game mode, which makes sense. AMD themselves say for gaming, if you're taking gaming benchmarks, that's the way you should do it for the Threadrippers. But for the Ryzen 7 2700X, when you activate game mode, you take it from being an 8-core 16-thread processor to a 4-core 8-thread chip, essentially turning it into a Ryzen 5 2400G without integrated graphics.
So, being in testing myself, right, and having a passion for hardware, I don't see, looking at their testing methodology for 5 minutes, you can see where there are glaring issues with the methodology. And I have to at least say that at least they're being transparent, right? They're not trying to hide anything. But with that said, when you're testing whatever it is you're testing, if they're on different platforms, you need to try and make those platforms as close to being identical as possible. Okay, you're gonna have different motherboard chipsets. That's fine. That's a variable. However, there are plenty of really good coolers that work on Intel and AMD sockets just fine. There are plenty of RAM sticks out there that work fine with both platforms. If they're testing CPU performance, they need to isolate and make those platforms as identical as possible so that the only variable, the only difference is the processor itself. And the fact that they ran it in game mode, which gimps it essentially to a 4-core 8-thread part. The fact that they ran 2666 memory and 1 DIMM in a few cases is another glaring issue, where they ran the Intel platforms in dual channel mode with much higher memory speeds, and they stayed with the retail box cooler, which honestly kind of gimps the auto boosting algorithms of XFR2 and Precision Boost 2 a little bit, because under a lot of those workloads, it's probably getting close to a thermal threshold, so it's gonna clock down.
Yeah,
they made those mistakes, and it's obvious, especially with Hardware and Box's benchmark data, where he was comparing the 8700K with the Ryzen 7 2700X. It's just it's poor testing, and for the fact that Intel is labeled it as Intel documentation, and the reviews are going to come out, and they're going to reflect the gaps in the testing methodology from the principal group. It's ridiculous.
Yep.
It's ridiculous. They cannot call themselves a professional testing entity.
And the thing that gets me about the whole thing is that Intel basically tells the independent tech outlets, you can do your testing, but you can't reveal it till the 19th.
Yeah.
Oh, but we're going to show our numbers as soon as it becomes available for pre-order.
Yeah.
That right there screams scummy to me.
Oh yeah, that's the thing that bugs me about it.
And they have their own QA teams who are top-notch professionals. Top-notch.
Mm-hmm.
And they could have done their own testing.
Yeah, they should have caught this kind of thing in some kind of QA process.
Yes.
It's I want to give, I want to give Principled Technologies the benefit of the doubt as much as possible. From what I've read about them and what I've looked up in the past, Principled Technologies is largely gaming, and gaming benchmarks are not their forte.
But they did say in the video with Gamers Nexus, the interview, the co-founder said, "I've been benchmarking things for, I think he said 20 years."
Right, but there is a world of difference from benchmarking things for enterprise than there is for doing gaming benchmarks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because a lot of times for enterprise benchmarks, you're wanting to benchmark for compatibility. You're wanting to benchmark for reliability versus flat-out performance.
Intel going to a third-party person, they're just wanting to push out a good review, a good benchmark review, instead of letting the actual reviewers, the YouTube reviewers, give their honest opinion. Because sometimes the reviewers, they don't hold the punches. When stuff doesn't work for them and they see it doesn't work it won't work for other people and having problems, like Intel was just trying to put out a good face, but they did it in a very poor manner, or at least picking the company who just, like you said, doesn't know how to benchmark games properly.
Yeah, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. I really do. But between all the glaring inconsistencies with their testing methodology and the fact that Intel is basically saying this matches what we found in our labs, it leads me to believe one thing, and that is Intel gave them ahead of time how they wanted these parts tested.
Mm-hmm.
And when it came out, test the parts this way. If Principled Technologies had not been as transparent as they were, these probably would have gone uncontested.
Yeah.
So I will give Principled Technologies, and I did watch the interview between Steve from Gamers Nexus and Bill Catchings, who is the co-founder of Principled Technologies. I watched that interview, and while it did seem like he was doing a lot of deflection,
mm-hmm.
I do have to say, it did seem like at least he was concerned by the fact that he may have gotten, or he or his testers may have gotten it as wrong as they did.
Mm-hmm.
Which they did make a response. They did write out a response to why they made the decisions they did, and the response, again, will be linked with all the other article links down below in the description. But basically, what they said is, in particular, they said, for almost 16 years, we have tested products for our clients because they trust our integrity. We have worked not just for any one company, but for dozens of leading technology firms, including rivals such as Intel and AMD, Microsoft and Google, Dell and HP, and many others. Those clients trust PT in part because our integrity and our technical knowledge are beyond reproach. Well, I'd take issue with that latter part, but okay. We work hard to be the best in both of those areas. We chose our company name to emphasize our commitments to both technology and our principles. And to our accusers saying we are only in this for the money, you obviously haven't read our book, Limit Your Greed. Before going further, we must also categorically deny any dishonesty in our work on this project for Intel or in any of our other projects. However, let us address these specific questions from the recent videos as well as subsequent posts and tweets. And there they go, and they address each of the issues as presented by Steve from Hardware Unboxed, Steve from Gamers Nexus, as well as some of the other articles. And while I don't agree with all of their answers, they do at least make a case for why they made the choices they did. Like I said, I disagree with some of their answers. In particular, why they went with 64 gigs of RAM for a Ryzen 7 2700X system. I mean, I get you're trying to standardize across the systems, but that doesn't seem realistic for such a style of system.
Unless you're using single-sided RAM, four sticks in a Ryzen system, even second gen Ryzen can be problematic.
Right. And I think you easily could have stepped down to 32 gigs across all these systems, and it would have had negligible results on the entire process.
It would have. I mean, if they're just simply doing gaming benchmarks, 16 gigs is all you need. Dual channel 16 gig kit. 2 sticks. That's it.
They also addressed the cooler issue for the Ryzen 7 2700X. Their answer was, because we were not performing any overclocking on any configuration, and we had been previously told by AMD that their stock Wraith Prism cooler was a good cooler if one was not overclocking, we stuck with the stock AMD Ryzen 7 2700X Wraith Prism cooler. Now, Steve from Gamers Nexus really pushed them on that point. You know, he said, yes, but it's a downdraft cooler in a case that has no front airflow. So you're getting at minimum two 30% reductions in airflow because the air is having to turn at least twice in the case.
That's a good point.
Versus with the other systems, which were using the Noctua's NHU14S, or the same cooler in its TR4 SP3 variant for the Threadripper chips, those are tower coolers that do not have that same disadvantage of being downdraft coolers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, they talk about some of the other things, why they use game mode.
Why would they use a non-ventilated case for gaming benchmarks? That's just interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder why. You know, I'm surprised they didn't disable L2 and L3 cache on the Ryzen systems. Sorry, that was bad.
I got that reference. They talk about why they specifically went with 1080p, why they used the high preset instead of ultra. That one, you know, that one I can actually agree with. Because they're trying to benchmark CPU performance rather than GPU performance, going with a high preset rather than ultra actually makes sense.
Yep.
You know, that one I agree with. Good on them.
Similar to Hardware Unbox's 720p testing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's been some additional videos put up, some additional information found out. We don't want to spend forever on this particular issue because it's already been talked to death in the tech press.
Yeah, like the Verge build video.
Yeah.
Anyway.
The point of all of this being,
the funny thing about their response also is the way this document is oriented. It wasn't in horizontal view, so everything is, all the cells are like messed up. So I do see the point where they say, replying to a comment on Twitter, apparently Principal Technologies thinks that Ryzen and Threadripper run on Z370 and Z390 motherboards. Like, no, not yes, the way you look at it, but that's a minor thing. But yes, the way you look at it, they just didn't orient it right.
Yeah.
The information is messed up because of that. If you look at it, it's like, oh yes, this goes with that, this goes with that, not all the way down like that.
Yeah, the formatting was a little funky, but again,
it's more of a minor thing.
Yeah, my take on this whole situation is this. Either this is a clear case of incompetence on Principal Technologies' part, which I think is probably the most generous read, or this is a clear case of Intel having bought and paid for a benchmark that they knew would be misleading and attempting to use it as marketing fodder.
I go with that.
Well, that's definitely the more cynical read, but I have a sneaking suspicion it's probably the more correct one.
Which, if that's the case, I kind of feel bad for Principal, because essentially you're paying a group that's supposed to have lots of integrity to tarnish their name. I hope they got a good paycheck out of it.
I mean,
that's the case.
Yeah.
And I think the cynical part of me thinks that Intel wanted to have a third party that they could use as a shield to say, well, hey, they're not our benchmarks.
Yeah, but to work for 10 days? Reviews are coming out from very reputable places in 10 days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like a small gap, maybe to pad pre-order numbers, but that's kind of silly too, because they've got, it's Intel. It's a new processor lineup that's coming out. Well, they're gonna sell like hotcakes, man.
Well, the other thing about this is everybody knows, everybody who's into hardware, into the CPUs and stuff, they know Gamers Nexus reviews CPUs and does benchmarks, Hardware Unboxed, Pulse Hardware, Bitwit, all those people. Not many people, I didn't know about Principal Technologies before. I don't know why I would trust, as a consumer of somebody wanting to buy the 9900K or whatever, why I would trust somebody who I've never heard of benchmarking the games and everything versus waiting the 10 days for the more reputable, more known reviewers.
Right, and that's another thing about quality assurance or testing, is that it's the idea that a third party that is unbiased is testing. And you know, anytime you've got internal or you've got results that are supplied by the manufacturer or the publisher, you always want to take those with a grain of salt. But that's why as an entity, third-party testing is really needed, because they're an unbiased entity that will give you reproducible results.
Yeah.
That can be trusted. They're tested and proven results, and they will give you an unbiased result at the end. And those are the results that people should view anyway. And I'm glad and happy that there are third-party reviewers out there that do that kind of, that fill that role or that gap or that need. It's nice. It's necessary.
You know, and I've been critical of some third-party testing houses. In particular, I've made clear my opinion about the fact that some reviewers for certain tech sites, in particular, I'm looking at you, Ryan Shrout from PC Perspective, also runs a research firm on the side that directly benefits from some of the work he does. And again, I just point to that one as a specific example because there was a thing a couple of years ago where Mr. Shrout was able to get access to certain Intel technologies before everyone else through his Shrout research arm of his business that he was then able to use to make reviews for PC Perspective, which might be entirely legitimate, but looks really shady.
Hmm.
And
I
so,
know about that.
I had followed him for years, and it bothered me when I found that out. It still bothers me a bit, to be honest.
Well, at some level, there's some bias there. So yeah, I can understand. Well, there was that issue with I want to say either Cabby Lake or Coffee Lake testing, where results across different reviewers were kind of skewed, and they found out that some motherboards have an auto overclocking feature turned on by default in the BIOS.
Yeah, multi-core enhancement.
Right. So I don't know.
And that was only detected because there was such a wide gap between the reviews in the independent reviewers across the tech press. And although, again, he's, Jim from Adored TV, even though he's considered to be a bit biased, it was he who ultimately broke out the story, pointing out that, hey, there's something not quite right here.
Adored TV. What is he biased towards? Intel?
Well, a lot of people called him an AMD shill. But mostly because he has published a number of videos, very detailed videos about the history about Intel's anti-competitive practices as well as NVIDIA's. But he also published video about ATI/AMD's practices that they have also done poorly.
Oh yeah.
And so I don't see it as personally, I don't see it as a bias when you point out the bad things everybody does.
No, I don't either.
And he actually did a video about this whole controversy as well that I didn't include in the links, but is easily found about Intel's history of kind of putting their thumb on the scale when it comes to certain benchmarks. And in particular, if anyone remembers Sysmark 2002 and Sysmark 2012, as well as Intel's direct hand in the company called Babco.
Why is that familiar?
And they were the company that produced Sysmark. Basically, AMD, VIA, and NVIDIA, and a couple of other chip producers basically walked away from their partnership with Babco because they said basically it's Intel's engineers rewriting all the benchmark software, and it specifically emphasizes tests that make Intel look better.
Okay.
And eventually it came to a lawsuit, and if you go to their disclosure page, Intel has to disclose that, yes, we provide significant portions of the code for these benchmarks. Among them are Sysmark, and one of the benchmarks that Principal Technologies got called out for, which is Bench Expert, which Principal Technologies also has a hand in helping produce.
Nice.
So draw your own conclusions, ladies and gentlemen. I want to believe that Principal Technologies simply showed gross incompetence in gaming benchmarks, and perhaps in their retesting, we will see improvements, or at least more consistent results with what everyone else was getting. But there is that little cynical part of me that says, nah, this was what was intended, and they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar.
Well, it doesn't, I don't feel, I don't know. Looking at the stuff from a 20,000 foot view, it doesn't feel like there's anything malicious here. I think it's some, basically an entity that's working with a lot of its own, and they were hired to do a job, and they just did it poorly. I want to say it's incompetence. So,
yeah. Well, like I said before, I kind of lean toward it's probably a little bit of incompetence and a little bit of, hey, we want you to benchmark these specific things, and here's how we recommend you do it.
Yeah.
Could be.
And if they don't have a lot of experience in gaming benchmarks, then there's no way they could look at that and say, well, wait, this doesn't make sense. Whereas, it could be entirely that Intel gave them, a review guide, as they are wont to do with even the independent reviewers, and said review guide included some things that either they misinterpreted or that they didn't realize were a bit sketchy. Because it may look like something they do every day in their enterprise level testing.
It's true.
I mean, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but there's a lot of inconsistencies here that makes one scratch their head. Anyway, we've dwelled on that far longer than it probably deserved, but at this point, I'm going to turn the next segment of the show, and this is what we'll close out with. Over to Jason. I'll let you go forward with this. We talked about the CPUs. What we haven't talked about are the motherboards that those mainstream series processors are going to be going into, which is the new Z390 motherboards from Intel. Now, Intel has stated that their 9th generation CPUs in their Core i line will work in any of the previous 300 series sockets. So it'll still work on H310, B360, H370, and Z370, but you will find the best power and regulation and support for the new high-end chips in the Z390 chipset. And so, Jason, I asked you earlier to take a look at the new Z390's boards and give us your opinions on what are the ones that stand out.
Okay. Yeah, I took a quick kind of a high level through each one. All I did was I went to Newegg, and then I filtered by Z390 and Seller Newegg. That's all I did. And then I priced, grouped by price highest first. And I was kind of blown away by the amount, just the sheer volume of Z390 boards that are just on Newegg right now. So I guess we can kind of start at the top. So I don't know if you want me to share my screen.
I can share my screen here.
Okay. I'm essentially just going to start from the top and work my way all the way down.
All right, and present to everyone. So here we go.
Okay, so the first I'll go over is the MSI MEG Z390 Godlike. I found this board kind of comical. Mainly from the name first, but then as I started kind of digging into it, first the price blew me away. $599. It's EATX, and if you look in the upper left corner of the motherboard, I believe there are two 8-pin 12-volt EPS connections. Also, if you scroll down a little bit to the first PCIe slot, there's a 6-pin here as well. Now, this looks like an absolutely amazing motherboard, and I'm sure for all intents and purposes it is, but this is way over the top. If you're overclocking, if you're overclocking i9 9900K on this thing, you will have no problem at all. This will do everything you ever want to do and then some. The two 8-pin connectors on the top there can pull in a potential maximum of 300 watts of additional power. That's on top of the 168 watts that the 24-pin connector can also pull in. So you're looking at a maximum total power consumption of potentially 468 watts out of this thing. So if you're overclocking i9 9900K on water, you're probably going to be consuming at best 220 to 250 watts under a synthetic test. You're probably going to average around 120 to 150 watts. So there's nothing that you can throw at this board that won't handle it under those use cases. If you want to spend $600, get the creme de la creme for an EATX board, this is it. In my opinion, it's way over the top.
All right.
The VRM is unbelievable. Okay, so moving on. I did see an out-of-stock motherboard, which is the Asus ROG Maximus 11 Formula Z390 Gaming. So first thing, the price, crazy high. It's $449.99. But, and this again, this is going to be another board that can do anything, be anything you want it to be. It's got an 8+4-pin EPS in the upper left corner.
Wow.
Again, that's more than you'll need for an i9 9900K overclock, even on water. That will pull in an additional 225 watts of power. So that will give you, what, just slightly less than 400 watts for the motherboard. And a lot of the motherboards in this next price segment can do that. And I do like the fact that this has a clear CMOS and a BIOS flashback buttons on the back I/O. So just to the left. Yeah, there you go. Very cool feature on some of these boards. Very cool. You've got tons of I/O back here. Lots of USB. One of the interesting things about this board that I think is pretty awesome, actually. So if you scroll to a picture of the VRM, so that top VRM is the SoC VRM. That's going to be responsible for power delivery of a lot of the system-on-chip features, like the IGP, or the integrated graphics, along with the memory controller. And in some cases, I want to say the PCI Express connections, but I could be mistaken. And then the lower left part of the VRM is going to be your vCore VRM, which is responsible for the power delivery of the actual CPU. The interesting thing here, this is a hybrid VRM cooler. So those two capped holes in the upper right and the lower left corner of this VRM cooler, those are water holes. So you could put a custom.
I noticed that.
You could put a custom water cooling loop on this, and I thought that was the coolest feature I think I've ever seen on a VRM heatsink. So outside of the price is crazy. This is, 3M.2 slots. So fantastic Asus BIOS, right?
Right.
This is going to be a great board, but you're going to be spending an arm and leg for it. So the next one I saw was priced $100 less. It's the Asus ROG Maximus 11 code Z390 Gaming. For all intents and purposes, I think it has the same VRM as the $450 board. I didn't see any differences there. It still had the same PCB.
Just no water holes.
Right, no water holes. But again, with this VRM, you probably don't need a whole lot of VRM cooling. This is a monster VRM on this thing. You're not really going to be pushing it that hard to overclock a 9900K or the i7 part either. Again, 8 plus 4 pin power connectors. It's way more than you need. Just an 8 pin is fine. Again, this has the clear CMOS and BIOS flashback buttons on the I/O.
Nice.
And all these boards that we've looked at so far have an integrated I/O shield, which is awesome. You get the great Asus BIOS, tons of RGB. Beyond the VRM cooler, I don't know where the $100 goes. But again, this is a $350 motherboard. So again, this is going to do anything you want it to do. I'm not sure what the difference is between this and the $450 one. Maybe there's some additional BIOS features. I don't know. I just kind of took a quick glance. Now, for $10 less, there's also another Maximus board. It's the Asus ROG Maximus 11 Hero Call of Duty Special Edition board. This one looked really good. The differences are slightly different. See, I don't know if the VRM heatsinks are all that different because the other one was kind of covered. I kind of like a more open VRM cooling solution like this one is. So if you wanted to put a fan on the VRM, you could. And it would probably cool a little easier. But honestly, with these VRMs, they're going to run really cold anyway. And again, you've got your 8 plus 4 pin EPS, which is way overkill.
What
Go ahead.
are the cylinder capacitor things around it for? Around the socket.
That's just to help with power delivery.
Oh, okay.
They should all be, I want to say I think they're normally rated at around 100,000 hours at 105 degrees Celsius. So they'll never get to that point. Unless you're in a super hot environment and you're running some crazy 24/7 operation on the CPU. Way beyond what it was intended for. But again, this is, other than looks, this looks like pretty much the exact same motherboard as the $10 one, or as the $10 more, as the Z390 Gaming that we just looked at.
Does that come with the game?
I think it does.
Come with the game.
That's good.
I think it does.
It includes Call of Duty Black Ops 4 Asus code for game bundle redemption.
Nice.
Dude, you okay, Hunter?
Uh-oh. You all right?
So I'm going to try and kind of speed through this. So there's an unknown in this realm. So at $335, I noticed a Super Micro board. I don't know much about Super Micro.
My only reputation with them is with server grade hardware. Apparently, Supermicro is well known for server hardware, although apparently there was some people are calling it a hit piece. Other people are saying it's unsubstantiated. The idea that some Supermicro boards contain chips from China that are supposed to be reporting information or...
Oh. Okay.
But the thing is, I highly doubt that.
Well,
Just because
so go ahead.
Supermicro has a stellar reputation in the enterprise.
And they're based in California.
Right.
I'm sure they're made in Taiwan, maybe, but I don't know. Maybe there is some back end China relationship. I don't know. But so I don't know much about this manufacturer in a consumer capacity. But there are a number of boards that are in different price segments. They look pretty solid. I mean, they don't look as flashy, but this particular one's got pretty much all the same features. Wi-Fi. Now I don't know if it's got the clear CMOS and BIOS reset button. Yeah, it doesn't. And the I/O is a little small in comparison. But overall, it looks like a decently solid board. I mean, it's got a solid VRM, but it's a $335 motherboard. So I didn't include it in my list of recommendations, but I did list it as an unknown. So that's pretty much all I had above 350. So as we venture below 300, what we lose is about all we lose, really, is maybe some of the flashiness and the clear CMOS and BIOS flashback buttons. That's about it. The next one I'm going to recommend is at $289, and that's the Gigabyte Z390 Aorus Master. Again, this kind of continues the trend. Huge VRM, more than you'll ever need for power delivery on an i9. You also have two 8-pin EPS 12-volt connectors, which again is way over the top. You're not going to need that. So with this board, you're going to have great build quality. It's going to be very stable. You'll get really good overclocks. You've got lots of M.2 slots. Thermally, power delivery, all that stuff's going to be really good. The only issue with this board is it's going to have kind of a clunky BIOS. What I mean by that is just the BIOS layout. Things aren't spaced out logically on the UEFI pages. With the BCLK clock, for example, they go up in tenths of a clock. So, for example, you'll have 1.1.0, 1.2, 1.3, and you'll have that in a drop down. So when you're trying to select a clock or a number from the BCLK drop down, you have to go through a huge list. So that's just one example. Otherwise, this board's very solid, and kind of resembles and has a lot of features from the $350 price bracket. This is a super solid board. I could easily recommend this to anybody, but it's
cool.
a $289 board. The next one I really liked was the Mini Meg, I like to call it. It's the MSI MEG Z390 ACE. I like to call it the Mini Meg in an ATX form factor. I like the fact that it's got a heat pipe for its VRM cooler. It does have, again, that 8+8 pin EPS. I'm not getting off my soapbox on this one. It's got Wi-Fi, huge VRM, decent BIOS. This will be a great overclocker. The BIOS experience won't be as good as an Asus, but it's still very solid. You've got the clear CMOS and BIOS flashback features on the back. So if you're overclocking, those come in very handy. It's got great I/O. Just a super solid board. Honorable mentions, I guess you could say ASRock boards. Any of the ASRock boards in this $250 to $300 price point are going to be decent, but they all have clunky, somewhat buggy BIOSes at times. That's their reputation. Now, not having these boards in front of me, I really can't speak to them. But with these boards, you're going to get very nice looking boards, very solid build quality. They'll have feature sets that will be competitive in the price segment. But again, their reputation, and this is not just Intel, but it's also AMD boards, is just a clunky BIOS experience. Like you select something and you expect it to work and it doesn't. Now moving on, I'm trying to kind of speed through this. I could speak at length about some of these. So in the $200 to $250 price point, there's a few boards here I like. So at $249.99, you've got the Gigabyte Z390 Aorus Ultra, which really, for all intents and purposes, really looks to me like it's the same as the $289.99 board. The only difference is being it lacks the clear CMOS, I think, and the BIOS flashback buttons. Also, it's got the 8+4 pin EPS instead of the 8+8, which it's nice, but it's really not needed. You just need an 8 pin. But I guess they have to justify the $250 price point somehow. Super solid VRM. Again, this is a solid board. It will have a clunky BIOS, but the BIOS does work. But look at that VRM. That's a massive VRM.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed.
Massive. So this should be a good overclocker. The Gigabyte boards from AMD and Intel for the last few generations have been very good memory overclockers as well. So for $250, this is a very solid board. Now moving on, a board that's about $5 less. We have an Asus ROG Strix Z390E gaming board.
Which one?
The Asus ROG Strix Z390E.
Okay.
$244.99. It's got a decent I/O. Not as many USB ports as say the Gigabyte or the MSI, but it's pretty decent. It has a single 8-pin, which I was happy to see because it makes sense. You don't need 8+8. You don't need 8+4. 8-pin is just fine. That's 150 watts of power. It's got an integrated I/O shield, which I really like. And you're basically getting the Asus BIOS experience. So this is kind of a solid board. Not sure what else to say about it. $245. I mean, it doesn't have all of the features as some of the others in its price segment, but I think it's well priced for what you get. Does include Wi-Fi, lots of RGB.
It does look pretty solid.
Yep. The next one I'm going to recommend is this is going to be priced at $219.99. It's the MSI MPG Z390 Gaming Pro Carbon AC. Lots of RGB, which is what you need nowadays.
Yep.
Got to have the bling.
Yes, sir. Gotta get some of that gangsta in there now. It's got a good BIOS. It does not have the clear CMOS and the BIOS flashback button. It's got an extremely solid VRM. I/O's a bit lacking, I think, compared to some of the other ones we've seen. But it's still not bad. Also, it's got the 8+4 pin, which we've already talked about pretty much, but pretty solid. I like the color scheme. It's got
it's
go ahead.
Yeah,
Still has
it's
Wi-Fi, which is good.
Yep.
Yeah, it's decidedly a neutral color scheme, but it's also not bland.
Correct. Moving on, my honorable mention, and this maybe it's more of a niche, but I'm really kind of a mini ITX fan anymore. It's at $209.99. It's the Asus ROG Strix Z390i gaming motherboard. For a mini ITX board, this thing is extremely good. You've got an 8-pin EPS, which is pretty standard. The VRM and SoC VRM, the vCore and SoC VRM have really good heavy heat sinks on them. And this board will overclock as long as you've got decent cooling. The back I/O is very well laid out, especially for mini ITX board. It's a full feature system, or a full feature motherboard. I do like the fact that the I/O shield is integrated. And for a little mini ITX board, this thing's pretty solid. And honestly, looking at the rest of the boards in the different segments here, the pricing's not too bad. But it's still a $210 motherboard. So for mini ITX, this is probably going to be my recommendation for the line.
Okay.
I've only got 2 more recommendations, so thanks for your patience. I'm moving on into the $149 to $199 price point, and anything below this, it's getting kind of skimpy. So my next recommendation is going to be the MSI MPG Z390 Gaming Pro Carbon board at $199. I kind of hesitate with this one because I don't know. The VRM looks pretty much identical to its pricier cousin. I think the only difference is that it doesn't have Wi-Fi. So I'd be okay with that. It's got lots of RGB. It's got good I/O, not great. An integrated I/O shield. It does have the 8+ 4-pin EPS, which is still, you don't really need it, but it's there. There's no clear CMOS or BIOS flashback. But if you're on a budget, this would easily run an i9 9900K and overclock this stuffing out of it just fine. It's got very solid VRM cooling. It's going to have a good BIOS. It's going to be able to memory overclock decently well. Just a very solid board. My next recommendation would be at $189.99 would be the Gigabyte Z390 Aorus Pro. This is going to be kind of a no-frills motherboard. You're going to get lots of features. It's got a very solid VRM along with VRM cooling. It's extremely solid. You do have the 8+ 4-pin EPS. I want to say the I/O shield is integrated. You don't get the clear CMOS or BIOS flashback. I don't think it's got Wi-Fi. Yeah, it doesn't have Wi-Fi. It's got a decent amount of USB on the back. And it will have
an HDMI port if you're using integrated graphics.
Right. Right. Which I think the majority of them do have. This is going to be kind of a no-frills motherboard. It looks good. It's going to perform well. It will have the clunky Gigabyte BIOS, and I also suggest staying away from their software stack. It's not exactly stable. But overall, it's going to be a nice solid board. Does that only have 3 DIMM slots?
No, I think what that is that's RGB lighting between the DIMM slots.
Okay, right.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, I thought I had 4.
Yes, it most certainly does. The only reason I recognize that for what it is because my X370 Gaming 5 has the same thing.
Ah, okay. Okay. So that pretty much completes my review. I did notice a few things beyond that. So, unfortunately, this is another line. So, things I don't recommend in the Z390 stack at all. Anything Asus Tough. Stay away from Asus Tough. Not that they're bad. I mean, they all look fairly decent. But when you start looking at other boards within the same price points, you're getting more features. And they seem to skimp a little bit on VRM when you're comparing it to the other boards. I mean, if you look at any of the Asus or MSI boards that are within this price segment, you're getting much beefier VRM and VRM cooling. And I can't speak to the overall importance of solid power delivery, especially when you're looking at a very highly clocked 8-core 16-thread part. I'm not that the tough boards are bad. I just think that they're overpriced, honestly. Also, if you're looking at 149 and lower, stick with MSI and Gigabyte, and you'll be mostly safe. Anything within the Z390 lineup for Gigabyte or MSI, I would recommend for somebody with the i9 part. Anything lower than 150, if you're looking at some of the other boards, they'll probably run, like an i5 just fine. But if you've got an 8-core, I'd be a little careful.
All right. Well, thank you very much, sir, for that analysis. Let me stop sharing my screen here. All right. As you all can likely tell at this point, it's been a long day for all of us.
Yeah.
But I'd like to thank both you and Hunter, both of you, just for stopping in, for everything you've done to contribute here to the episode. Of course, if you've enjoyed the content that you've seen here, stay tuned. We will be back next week with more of the tech news. And in the meantime, I've been Dynamo Ned. This has been TechForge. And remember, when life has you down, Jesus loves you, and forge on.
Yep, forge on.
We love you, Ned.